grab me a beer and grab him a coke. We about to sit for an hour, bullshit and tell jokes. And please don't mix it up, cause he done sobered up. Brandon T Comedy on your social media feeds. And Brandon Taz if it's your ex drinking buddy. Brandon Taz if it's your ex drinking buddy. Brandon Taz if it's your ex drinking buddy. Brandon Taz if it's your ex drinking buddy.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into another edition of Brendan Tassif is your ex-drinking buddy. I'm your host, Brendan Tassif. If you're new to the show, quick rundown of the show. I used to be everyone's favorite drinking buddy. It was my favorite thing to do. Hang out with friends, get drunk, do drugs, get in all sorts of trouble, reminisce about crazy old stories. I am sober now, but that is still one of my favorite things to do. Hang out with friends and talk shit, talk shop, and just reminisce about the good old days. Most weeks I will be joined by a guest. This week is no exception. New York City comedian, podcaster, overall great guy, Steven Rogers.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me.
What's up, man?
Not much. How are you?
I'm fantastic.
That's
Thank you so
great.
much for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I'm excited to be here. How long have you been sober?
4 years next month.
Wow. That's great. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's
I appreciate
awesome.
it. I want to, because we are here for a reason,
Yes.
tell everybody about the album. Album coming out.
I got an album coming out. It's my first album. It's called Before He Was Super. It makes me feel good when the title works. But yeah, check it out. It's gonna be pre-order is now, right?
April 8th when this comes out,
and comes out May 6th. It will also be on YouTube. So just follow me on social media, Steven Rogers Comedy on Instagram and all the other stuff, and it's good. It's good. So please, for the love of God, get it and pre-order. If you get pre-order, it helps the algorithm. So when it comes out,
it's the algorithm, man.
Yeah, it's all about the algorithm. Yeah.
Tell everybody about your podcast too, and then just plug any dates or anything like that. You got coming
sure,
up.
Yeah. I have a really fun podcast called Panic Attacking. It's with my buddy Andrew Chavone, who's a wonderful comedian. We just talk about what made us anxious that week and just make fun of the stuff that made us anxious, make fun of each other, and we take listener submissions of anxiety and give non-professional advice. And,
non-medical advice.
Yeah, and riff about said anxieties. And I'm going to be in L.A. most of April. And,
woo!
Yeah, and then... I'm touring with Brian Regan, so just check my website.
Wait. The Brian Regan?
Brian Regan.
There we go.
And I'm doing some headlining stuff in May at Go Bananas in Cincinnati.
Beautiful.
So, yeah, please just check out my website, StevenRogersComedy.com.
Perfect. Well, I'm so happy to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
I definitely wanted, we did a show together. It was my second book show ever in New York City.
That's right.
So it's funny because that actually means, like, the people I was on the show with, I remember because I was like, this was the second show I ever did in New York. It's so much, like, book show. It's so much fun.
Right.
And everyone else is like, we do, like, 6 shows a night, man. Like,
yeah, I remember that show for a couple of reasons. One being that I remember you telling me that night that you just moved in. Were you moving in that week?
No. I had been there for a couple of months at that point, like 2 or 3 months maybe.
I just remember you were new to the city.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I remember is that right before I went on stage, they gave everyone in the audience shots.
Yeah.
They gave everyone in the audience Jell-O shots. And I was like, there is no way I can follow the excitement this audience just experienced. When I saw their eyes for Jell-O shots, I was like, there's nothing I can do that can follow this.
That show was interesting because I invited my cousin, love her to death, Rachel. Shout out Rachel. But she's like been in New York for years. And she's very personable. She's just a great overall person. So she has so many friends.
Right.
Like so many friends.
Yeah.
Like she tells me about how many people like they're going to invite to the wedding. I'm like, I don't even know that many people. And so she brought like 20 people to the show.
Wow.
She basically sold the whole show out.
Wow.
And then she came up to me, like, I think when Espy was up, like 1 or 2 comics in, she came up to me. She goes, hey, I only brought a very small portion of my very close friends because I didn't want to overwhelm you.
Wow.
And I was like, well, first of all, you're coming to anything I ever get booked on.
Yeah.
Second of all, it was interesting because I got up there and they're all her friends. So they're all,
Yeah.
in their 20s, very attractive, like,
Right.
young women. And I was like, oh, my material might not work for this room.
Sure.
Talking about cutting my face open and like boozing hard, and they're all looking at me like side-eyed. And then they did shots, and then you went up, and I was like, oh, I totally just destroyed this for Steven.
I mean, I think my comedy destroyed it for myself. I mean, I did well, but it's like there is very little. I am not a party like my set is not a party night comedy set. It's funny, but it's hard to follow shots. When I'm like, man, I get nervous, and it's a weird.
Man, anybody else here have anxiety?
Yeah, I love coffee. Who else? Oh, you guys are on something else. All right, cool. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to learn a little bit more about you. So you're not originally from New York.
I'm from the state. I'm from Syracuse, New York, which is upstate New York, center of the state. It's 2 hours from everywhere. I grew up there, started there, moved to New York City around 2017.
Okay, so when did you? So many questions. When did you start doing comedy?
2013, January 10th.
And oh wow, you know it. Did you? Now, I've talked about this before on the show. We've had so many different people on. Some people who literally were just like, oh, everyone told me I was funny, so I tried it.
Right.
Some people who were like me, who've been watching like Mitch Hedberg since you were, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. I tell people all the time that original Dane Cook Harmful Have Swallowed was the reason I got into I was like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
And so for you, did you, or like people who just like Seinfeld and like the show and like comedy, like acting and stuff. And so they decided maybe an avenue would be through stand-up. How did you get hit with the stand-up?
I'm the same as you.
Okay.
I saw Wendy Liebman's HBO half hour.
Okay.
That's the one that stood out for me. And I remember my parents watching that, or, I don't remember who was on TV. I remember when I saw Wendy, I was like, I want to do this. But I remember also seeing my parents watch stand-up and being like, oh, this person's killing so hard, it's affecting this room as well as the room they're in when this was recorded.
Yeah.
I was like, this is a powerful thing. And it's funny, and I like that. And I became a nerd. Jim Carrey movies were a big thing.
Yep.
For me, and then Dangerfield. Everybody loves Raymond. Like, I was a big Ray Romano guy. Ellen's HBO hours got me through high school, and then late night sets. A lot of Letterman sets.
Yeah.
A lot of old Carson sets. I became obsessed with those, and then I became obsessed with late night stand up.
And you have. Done.
I've been lucky enough to do it. And
tell me about that, because for the listeners, we'll go back. I try to do chronological, talk about the guests, and then we kind of get into the stories. But this is always, I love having people on who not only appreciate and love stand-up, but then have also, it's kind of dovetailed. Like, I used to watch that, now I do that.
Yes.
Which is what I've talked about with the podcast.
Yeah.
Like, it was, Your Mom's House and After Disaster and a couple of podcasts that helped me get through college. Like, especially when my drinking got real bad and stuff, those were people I could always turn to, and they were there every week. And now I do a podcast for people.
Yeah.
And so it's so crazy to think about. It's the same thing with stand-up, but for you to be almost obsessed with like the late night spots and then to get one, what was that like?
I mean, a very emotional experience.
Were you like taking pictures of because I couldn't imagine, like I'd be.
He will get a kick out of this because I know he's listening. My father was backstage, and I knew I wouldn't have to take any pictures because my dad takes pictures of everything. He's probably taking a picture of this podcast somehow.
Right now.
Yeah. So,
honey, give me your phone. I got to take a picture of you listening.
Yeah. I love my parents to death. My mom, my parents were supportive from day one.
Okay.
And super supportive. Went to all my shows in Syracuse and stuff. So I was like, you're coming down for this late night. It's as much yours as it is mine because you guys were so helpful. And my mom likes watching the crowd when I'm on stage. She gets a real thrill out of seeing the strangers laugh. So I put her in the audience and my dad backstage because my dad was a big comedy nerd. Mm-hmm. So I was like, this is great. Everybody gets to experience what they want. or what they love out of this. And then I had a couple comedy friends backstage, Peter Wong, Tobin Miller, and Andrew Chavone, who I do the pod with. And it was a real fun hang. And it didn't hit me that I was doing it until they have the monitors backstage, and they move the camera around to, like, show prep or whatever.
Yeah.
And at one point they pan to the crowd and it's just full. Like I get there and there's nobody there.
Yeah, and then you're backstage and you don't. Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's full, and that's when I was like, "Holy crap!" And I'm wearing the suit and everything. It was cool. And then the real fun experience that gave me chills, still gives me chills, is that what you do is you stand backstage and there's a stagehand who's got their hand on your back, and then all of a sudden they just push you
and you go out,
and that's it, and then you're out there.
God,
it's like skydiving. I've never done that, but I would assume it's like that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about how you ended up there, and now moving forward, touring with Brian, and now the album's coming out and everything. So when you started doing stand up, you started in Syracuse. Were you just doing open mics, or how is that? Because I've heard I've heard people take the class. I've heard people go to open mics. I heard people like, oh, I knew some people who ran a show, so they just put me on it. Like, there's so many different avenues to start. So you just started the old-fashioned way, open mics.
I kept putting it off.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to do this since I was a little kid. I would talk about it, and I
did one open mic and changed all my handles to Brennan T Comedy, and then didn't do another set for like a year.
That's funny.
So
There's so many people.
I know the understanding of like, no, I am going to do this eventually. And thank God I did, because now it's super convenient.
Yes. Yeah. Thank God you still have that handle. But I remember talking about it, all this stuff. And
Is this in high school?
Earlier.
Okay.
But at one point we were getting closer to me graduating, and I'm still talking about it. And my parents were supportive, but my dad, I remember both my mom and my dad around graduation going, you should do it at the graduation party. You should do some stand-up. And I was like, I don't know. And I remember my dad saying, if you're not going to do it in front of your family, I don't know who you're going to do it in front of.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, oh, okay, that makes sense. It was starting to be real. And then I did it at the graduation party. It did fine.
And you've been writing this whole time for years.
Writing, but don't really know how good it was because I wasn't doing the other half of it, which is getting up.
Just notebooks full of stuff.
Yeah, but I think that's a lot of people's beginnings. And then I did my graduation party. I only remember one joke, which I thought was funny, was I'm glad you're all here. As you know, I'm trying to be a stand-up comedian, so I will be asking you all for money again. And now, so I was like, okay, I can't. I remember getting a laugh and being like, okay. And then tried mics, but I wouldn't even call that attempts at stand-up. It was clearly just to get used to bombing in front of strangers and talking in front of them. And then the Syracuse Funny Bone opened, and they were doing ads for like guest spots for local people, and I submitted.
And when was this?
2013.
Okay.
And then January 10th, they booked me for a guest spot, and I did it, and it went well. And then a local headliner was in the audience checking out the club, and he was like, "Hey, you're like good. I know you're new and you're green. Would love to show you the ropes. Come with me I got a show. You can do a guest spot," kind of thing. Nick Mara, really funny comic out of Syracuse, and then that kind of just got the ball rolling.
Okay, yeah, that's when I came back. So I started in 2009 and then took a break. Obviously, arrests and booze and drugs and stuff, and then when I finally came back in and got sober in 2018, and I came back in, same thing. One of the local headliners, Marcus Crespo, friend of the show, one of my best friends in the world, he's been on like 3 or 4 times. He was like, "All right, like you're doing it.
Yeah,
like, you're back."
Yeah.
And he had already known me prior,
Yeah.
but then he saw me and he saw how dedicated I was and how much I kind of had turned my life around. So he goes, all right, we're going.
Nice.
And then he just took me under his wing and I just started featuring for him way before I should have. Because
Yeah.
you take 3 or 4 years off, it's like riding a bike,
Right.
only if you have to do that every single day to maintain the bike riding.
I think outside of major scenes, you get everything before you're ready because there's not a lot
There's not a lot to go, yeah.
there's not a lot of fish in the pond, which works out. I think my growth came a lot from getting stuff and having to rise to the occasion.
Yeah.
The first time I opened for Brian Regan, I wasn't doing 20 minutes all the time. Definitely not in front of theater crowds. So
Wait, you were doing 20 minutes in front of 2,500 people?
Right, exactly. And that made me rise to the occasion. Like I have to do this well. And obviously other people believe in you because that's why they gave you the spot. But
yeah. Well, I talked about this with LA comic Katrina Davis. She was just on the podcast last week. And we talked about it all the time. Getting booked the first time for something isn't that difficult. It's getting asked back.
I think people don't think about that enough.
Yeah.
And like people fight tooth and nail to get on a show, and it's like, I wouldn't say a show like a spot in a scene, but like on the road, people fight to get in a club to headline or something, and it's like, well, can you headline there twice?
Yeah.
Because that's
Are you
going
to get called back the next year?
Yeah.
Are you going to be on the rotation of regular
I think
comedians?
that's way more important than being like, headline this club. And it's like, yeah, do you want to be in the rotation?
Yeah.
That's,
you headlined the club once because you asked for a favor from a friend who is in the rotation.
Right.
And then you shit the bed and now all of a sudden it's...
Yeah. So I think I'm a very impatient person, but I think that's a big part.
Well, I'm the same way. I'm very much, especially obviously with my history, very instant gratification.
Sure.
Like I was in New York for 3 months and I was like, why am I not passed anywhere? I did my first, I think I'm all 100% sure I've talked about it on the show, but when I did my first audition to get into a club, it's not even a very good club.
Yeah.
But I did the audition and then I get the call back and the guy gave me a lot of good advice.
Yeah.
Some of it was kind of like, but it was one of those situations where one of the first things he said was, "Oh, so you're a storyteller," and I was like, "Yeah, I am." Like, thank you for noticing. Like, I take a lot of pride in that. And he goes, "That's not a compliment." He was like, "In New York, you got to bang, 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 bang," and I was just like, "What the fuck? I've been doing this for a decade. Like, what are you talking about?" But it's just one of those things, like you said. It's not only getting in the door, but it's getting in the door and then being asked back and rising to the occasion, whatever it is. You know. What's the old saying? You jump and hope to God you can fly.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you've experienced all sorts of success, obviously, with the album and the podcast and, you know, featuring for Brian and then the late night spot. You also, I find this fascinating because as someone who also suffers with horrific anxiety, how does that play out? Because you said you're impatient, so and I'm built similarly. Like I want everything now, but I'm also too anxious to ask for stuff. So it's one of those weird, you know, double-edged swords. So for you, like with having the kind of anxiety and stuff that you have you found that it's made it more difficult, or has it actually worked in your favor because you get stuff done quickly and you're like, all right, I'll get it?
Right. I'd say both. The positives are I'm afraid that I'm not good enough, so I work really hard.
Yeah.
I'm afraid of silence, so my set is filled with punchlines. And I'm, you know, fear is a powerful motivator. So I think it makes me work hard and be a better comic. I'm not saying my anxiety is why I'm funny. I'm saying it certainly helps me work towards getting better.
Yeah.
Also the drive and desires, but that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, the level of anxiety that I have, and I'm sure you have too, it's almost like a superpower. Like it can be
for sure.
If you use it the right way.
Yeah.
Like people will see me throw up before a show and they go, "Oh, that's terrible." And I go, "No, I care this much about doing well at this show."
And I'm lighter.
Hey, lost a little baby weight. I'm svelte right now.
And the negatives, which we were talking about this outside, I feel like an outsider. I feel like everyone thinks I stink, so I don't reach out.
Yeah.
But I fight that. I go against. There's a thing called opposite action. Your brain's telling you to do one thing. It's actually the opposite that will make you feel better. In certain cases, not every single situation. This one being, I shouldn't reach out. I should wait till they reach out to me because that will be the sign that I'm good enough. Well, it's like, no, I'm going to reach out, and then because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to. I can't sit around and wait for spots to come because that's to me the anxiety is saying, well, you're being lazy.
Yeah,
that's my anxiety of being a lazy person because there's a lot of people in comedy because it's not a structured job that go, okay, I'll just sit around and wait for some spots to come in. It's like, no, I gotta fight for them.
You gotta do the work.
Gotta do the work. So even though I'm afraid of an answer of, yeah, no, you never, ever will you be on this, I still reach out.
In my head, that's the main answer that plays in my head constantly.
But then the more rejections you get, the less scary they are.
Yeah, the less it hurts. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
When you graduated, did you go to college or did you decide to move right into?
I went to community college thinking that you needed something. In hindsight, I should have I think I was delaying stand-up, but I started when I was 20, so I didn't wait too long.
Yeah.
But I didn't really go to college. I went to community college, communications degree, which is funny because I.
Oh, so you actually went? You didn't go for like a semester and be like, oh, never mind.
No, I got the degree. I thought, well, communications will. Went into it going, well, there'll be stuff that maybe will help me with stand-up.
Yeah.
And maybe
Did you get a bachelor's or an associate's?
I think associates.
Yeah, the 2-year.
That's how little I know or use what I'm like, I think it's associates, whatever the 2-year one is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't use it or anything.
Yeah, I would assume. So then you moved to the big city, you said in 2017?
Mm-hmm.
What was it like going from Syracuse and like a smaller market and that whole thing into coming into New York?
I called home the first week and was like, I'm coming back.
Yeah, me too.
And my parents, I mean, I truly can't vouch. So guys, book my parents. I can't say enough how much they helped. And I know that's their job, that they're being good parents, but it was like they were. I owe so much to them. They were like, no, because at that time I was opening for Brian.
You were?
I started opening for Brian while I still lived in Syracuse.
Oh, how did that happen?
I still worked at a grocery store. And
I didn't see that coming.
No.
As Derek Gaines says, plot twist.
Brian saw me at a festival. And
so you were, I don't mean to interrupt, but you were doing the full-fledged like comedy thing in Syracuse.
Mm-hmm.
You weren't like half-assing like
I was
doing
on the
mics
road.
Here and there. Okay.
I was featuring at Funny Bones on the road and maybe Hilarities in Cleveland, a couple of clubs. Like Rocky Laporte, who's hilarious, saw me and he was having me open for him. Rob Little, I would open for him. And Nick Mara would take me around.
So you met all these people through Syracuse?
Through Syracuse.
The Funny Bone in Syracuse?
Or Buffalo or Albany. I was fighting tooth and nail to get whatever I could.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I would drive 2 hours to Buffalo, 2 hours to Albany, an hour and a half to Rochester to get up.
This totally changes the dynamic. Well, because honestly, I thought we were talking about, because I've had so many people on the show where they're like, yeah, I was doing open mics and I was, doing shows like in my local scene. And I'd go from Jacksonville to Savannah to Atlanta and do that whole thing.
I did that too.
It's like I feature for Marcus, which I love, and like a few of the other headliners in the Southeast, but I wasn't featuring for like theater shows.
Right.
But you were in Syracuse and you were like, oh no, like I'm doing this. Whether it's in Syracuse, doesn't matter. Like I'm doing this.
I might have been annoying. I would ask any comics I could get I knew people or would reach out to people and be like, what do I need to know about doing this? And a lot of what I would hear is, you got to get up every night. Once a week's not enough. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that means driving.
Yeah.
Because Syracuse, we could get up twice a week. If you hosted the club, you could get up 7 times a week. But that was it within 4 days.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I got to host my local club as much as possible, and I got to get out on the road. And I would sometimes with my family, drive to Buffalo, drive to whatever. I remember how much of a big deal it was when I think I did Bethel, Pennsylvania. It was right on the other side of the border of New York and Pennsylvania. And I was like, oh, I'm now doing other states.
Yeah.
Like chasing that. And
same thing when I went to Georgia. I could say nationally touring.
Yep. And I did a festival in Jamestown, New York, which is where the album was recorded. Same room. Brian was in that room watching the show, saw me came up to me, said, great job. And
what's going through your mind when Brian Regan comes up? And
I
says,
unfortunately knew he was in the audience as I took the stage. I heard he was coming, and I was hoping he would not be there while I was on stage.
Yeah.
Because I did not want to find out if he thought I was funny.
Yeah. That's a terrible fear to face.
Then I saw him come in as I was hitting the stage. Like he and I are doing the same walking. He's walking to sit down, and I'm walking on the stage.
Oh, no.
And
did you panic?
I did, but nobody knew. Because everybody came up to me after and went, thank God you didn't know he was here. And I was like, well, I didn't show.
Actually.
Yeah. So my set was all over the place, but nobody knew that but me.
Yeah.
Because, usually your jokes connect, and mine were all over the place, but no one.
I get so frustrated because I can do a stream of content. Like, it's all together.
Mm-hmm.
But then sometimes, like you said, you get up there and they'll be disjointed and disconnected, and you're like, that sucked. And everyone's like, great job. And it's like, no, you don't understand. It's supposed to be a through line all the way through the set.
Nobody knew. And it worked out. He said, great job. And I, just stammered and was like, yeah. And then a month later, his manager reached out. I was at the grocery store I worked at when I got the call to open for him.
And did you have any representation at this time?
No. I had a manager at the store. And then
so you just get a call on your cell phone.
Yeah,
and you're like, "Hey, what's up?" This is so and so. I represent Brian Regan. He'd like you to. Oh my god!
And then I was opening for him for a year.
You quit the grocery store.
I kept working there.
What?
I would obviously take time off to travel to Seattle to open for Brian, but I would come back and work this grocery store because I'm a worker. I can't sit still, and I come from a family of we work.
Yeah.
And then I got enough money saved up from opening for Brian, and then I was like, I'm gonna take the leap. And Eric Aspira, a really funny comedian with ties to Upstate, reached out and said, I have a room available. And that's when I was like, let's do it.
Yeah.
And then
when you came to the city, were you like, I'm just going to do comedy full time, or did you get a job here?
I did a temp thing one time.
Okay. And
I was like, nah, I'm done.
You're just focused on comedy.
I'm here to be a stand-up comedian.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
That's something that I have trouble with because I work in the service industry. I work in a really nice restaurant, and it's one of those things where I moved to New York for comedy, and there's so many times where my coworkers would be like, dude, you could make dumb money if you just worked 5 or 6 days a week. Like my managers asked to schedule me, and it's like, that's not why. If I wanted to wait tables full time, I would have stayed in Florida,
right,
where I could do whatever shows I wanted, and I didn't have to pay state income tax,
right,
or city or borough or county, any of those taxes.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where when we got up here, I had to get a job just to kind of maintain. But it's been difficult because, you try to be the best at whatever you're doing, and then I'm pretty good at my job, so they want to schedule me more. But like I moved up here for comedy, but it's like I also like having all my bills paid and not having to worry about anything. So it becomes this whole thing where it turns into this, what is it? The gift of the Magi, where it's like I want to work to maintain life in New York, but I moved to New York for comedy. So it's like you got to pick one or the other.
Yeah.
And it gets difficult only in the sense that it turns into this whole thing where it's like, no, I had to talk to my job a few months after being here. I was like, no, these are the days that I can work. That's it.
Right.
If that doesn't work, I'll find a new job.
Yep.
Like, there's a lot of restaurants in New York.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's not that difficult.
No. It's not like you're working the one restaurant.
Yeah. Well, in Jacksonville, there was only like 3 really nice restaurants.
Right.
So it was like, oh, if you get fired from one, they talk to the other one.
Of course.
But in New York, it's not like that. I wanted to get into some of these stories. So
sure.
We did mention how you do have panic attacks and anxiety and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You had sent me a list. One of them just says panic attack at hotel.
So I did this as well. I still lived upstate. I did a hotel gig.
What do you mean, like in the ballroom?
Something like, I think, yeah.
Yeah, because
like conference. No, not conference room, but yeah, that kind of banquet room like thing. And
they do so many of those in Florida.
Oh yeah, well that's what any scene like that. Yeah, I think it's similar, like Elks Lodges, that kind of stuff. I was doing all that stuff, firehouses, and I was with. There was this guy that would book me on these great. They were always great shows. Danny Liberto, and
shout out Danny.
He was a Rochester area guy, and it would always be a showcase type show. It wouldn't be a 3-man show. It'd be maybe 4 or 5, 4 guys usually, and we get there and we're doing the show, and Danny's a weed guy, and I'm like, I'm staying the night here, and I'll smoke some with Danny and the comics. I liked all of them. I wasn't going anywhere, and I'm like, I haven't seen these guys. Let's do it. And this is after my set, and then there's these. I was in a relationship at the time. There was these girls there. And everybody else was single, all the other comics. So I was like, all right, you guys do your flirting, whatever. And me and another comic, we were nerding out about comedy at the bar. So I had 1 beer, and I had a couple hits of pot. And it's late, and the flirting is getting louder. Like the girls and the guys are drunker.
Yeah.
And they're all, chatting up each other and whatever. But then the one girl gets super drunk or whatever, and she's getting louder, and my anxiety's perking up.
Yeah.
I didn't know I had anxiety at this point.
Oh, really?
I did not know. I didn't know there was a name for what I was like.
The fact that you were always worried.
Always worried. And now I'm starting to, and I have a thing with authority. So I'm like, all right, we got to keep it down. We're still at a hotel. We're at a place where people can tell us to shut up. And I'm like, all right, let's go. I'm going to go back to my room.
I'm getting the fuck out of here.
Yeah. And the party, if you want to call it that, moves towards the rooms and the hall, and we pass the desk, and one of the girls runs over to the desk and starts ringing the bell.
Oh no.
And
this is making my anxiety perk up.
and that got me. I'm like, I got to get to my room. And I get to my room, and there's another comic. I think we were sharing a room. And I'm like, I got to sit down on the bed. And then they're running up and down the hall. Like, there's like this weird flirting I haven't seen before. I'm like, this is what like, I don't go out and try to get laid on the road.
Yeah, me neither.
I'm like, so this is what that is? I'm like, this is
terrible.
This is terrible and anxiety-inducing for someone that's not even invested.
Yeah.
And they're running up and down the hall, joking around and whatever. And I heard a guy, and I'm sitting down at this point. I'm like, I need to sit. And I hear a guy yell, "Shut up." And it's like 2 a.m. or whatever. And once that happened, all of a sudden, I'm like, whoa, something's going on with me. And this is my first panic attack. I know now.
Yeah.
And
it's the worst.
It was my worst one because I started to have the worst chest pains I've ever had in my life, and it felt like I was being stabbed.
You can't breathe. Yeah,
I couldn't breathe, and I really was fully like just flinching, like I was being stabbed. I've never had anything like it since, but I've had panic attacks since, but nothing this bad. And I was like to the other comic, and I'm 23 at this time. I go, I can't believe I'm going to say you have to call 911. And he's like, what? And I'm like, I'm having a heart attack.
Yeah, because that's exactly what it feels like.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm definitely having a heart attack. And I remember 911 not caring at all.
Really?
They were not sensitive about it. They were like, clearly, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But then the ambulance shows up.
So they did show up.
They did show up, and they got the gurney thing.
Yeah, stretcher,
And I remember that they came to the hotel room, and I saw them, and I didn't feel high or drunk. So, but I'm like, maybe something's in my system, whatever. And I'm like, I'm embarrassed. I'm gonna walk over to them.
I'm embarrassed.
And I remember walking to the stretcher. Clearly, don't need the stretcher. I remember. There's no need for the stretcher at all.
That's the best. I'm embarrassed.
And I walk over and I get in, and then they put me in the back of the ambulance.
So you just walked into the ambulance?
I walked into the stretcher. I'm like, well, they brought it all the way here. I guess I'll get on. It's so dumb. They put me in the back of the ambulance, and one guy's really nice. They were good cop, bad copping me, which I thought was interesting.
The EMTs were good cop, bad copping.
Yes. And one guy goes, hey, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. You're all right, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to take care of you.
Did they know they could tell you were having a panic attack?
I don't know at this point. And then the other guy goes, what are you on? What'd you take? And I'm like, I had one, and I'm 23, so I'm legally had one beer in my system. And I'm like, and I had some pot. And he's like, you took something else, and you have to tell me right now so I know how to take care of you. I'm like, I swear to God, I'm not on anything else. He's like, your heart rate is unbelievable. You
PCP or Coke, or he thought it was something like that.
He thought I was like really on a lot of stuff. And I'm like, I swear I'm not on anything. And this isn't helping whatever this is. And then
it's just making it worse.
Yeah. And they're poking me with needles and whatever. And then we take the ambulance ride over. And then I get to the hospital. They have me pee in a thing. And then I remember just laying down and passing out.
Yeah.
And then I wake up the next morning in that same spot. And then I remember just getting up and being like, am I good? And then I got a cab to my car.
Oh, really?
And then drove home, got a doctor's appointment. And the doctor was like, so I have all your tests here. You had
from the hospital?
From the hospital. He's like, you had no weed in your system. And I see nothing wrong with you. And I was like, but I don't understand. I felt like I was dying, and I'm like, and I'm not being over dramatic. I'm like stabbing. Remember?
Yeah, 911.
Yeah, 911. Yeah, and he's like, well, you have anxiety. I remember him saying it so matter of fact. He was like, so you have anxiety, and then it was like back to something else, and I'm like, whoa, what's this thing we're talking about? And he's like, yeah, it was probably a panic attack, and that's all. And then that's when
that's all.
Yeah.
You thought you were dying, and the doctor just brushed it off as, that's all.
I'm from, Syracuse is maybe it's not Syracuse, but it's a blue collar area. I don't think, and this was 2016. I don't think anxiety is talked way more about now, and not that it wasn't back then, but I still feel like mental health is still a little bit behind.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, they couldn't care, and that's where all my anxiety material came from, was trying to figure out what the hell happened that night. And
really?
And then learning all this about myself. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up some people just, in some places, it's just kind of one of those things where mental health isn't, like, I got the scars all over my body to prove it from when I used to hurt myself and stuff, because I didn't know. I had this weird feeling inside where I was always terrified, and I couldn't figure out what it was from.
Of course.
And then you matched that with the depression, and I was like, I don't know. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with comedy, was because I'll never forget, Tom Rhodes was one of his first Comedy Central Presents, God, 20 years ago. That was one of the first ones I ever saw. Yeah. And I remember watching it and laughing, and I was like, wait, before I turned this on, I wanted to die.
Yeah, yeah.
And now I'm laughing. And that's when I was like, oh, the power of stand-up is insane.
Yeah,
But-
Ellen was that for me.
Yeah, that's what you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
But and that's one of those things where people just don't talk about when I was a kid, because I'm older than you, but when I was a kid, and I'm sure you experienced this too, growing up in a blue collar kind of town. It's just you didn't shut up, just shut
Yeah.
up and do your job.
Yeah.
Like my dad used to always say, and he would say it as like a joking way, but it still holds true to this day. It was, you want to cry, I can give you something to cry about.
Yeah.
Which is just one of those mentalities of, because he grew up in a blue collar, community. His dad was a Green Beret, so he grew up in that kind of very rough environment.
Right.
And he would always say it like tongue in cheek, like as a joke, but that's like a real thing.
Yeah.
And and so how do you take anything now, or how do you manage the anxiety now?
I go to therapy, and I love it. I love therapy, and I exercise, and I meditate occasionally. I'm trying to. I've had to learn to not be as hard on myself.
Yeah, that's something I'm still trying to.
It's a practice, therapy term. It's not a switch,
Yeah.
We have to. I've done that with all forms of my life, and it's still a practice. I'm still working on it, but it's like with my writing, I am nicer to myself when I'm creating. When I am trying to introduce exercise into my routine, I'm nicer about it and easier on myself with it, instead of being like, okay, 7 days a week, 40 minutes every day, you don't miss a day, that kind of thing. It's like, that's not conducive with anxiety. It actually creates more than it alleviates. So it's
which is something I'm familiar with.
Yes,
because I power lift, but if I miss, I go to the gym 6 days a week, but like I wasn't feeling great yesterday.
Yeah.
And I still went to the gym, and I was like achy and not feeling awesome. And I was like, no, you got to go. You got to go. And it made it worse. Like I was like, I don't want to be here.
Right.
Like I should just go home and lay down. And it's like, nope, got to do it.
And that's, yeah.
It has the opposite. Everyone's like, yeah, work out. It's good for anxiety. I'm like, it has the opposite effect for me.
It's really different for everybody, and it's just figuring out what works for you in steps, and not like I think Joe Zimmerman told me this, or I think I heard this about him. There's a checklist of things that you need to be a human being.
Yeah,
and it's different for everybody. But your typical water, sleep, exercise, and whatever it is that makes you, like, for us it's writing or stage time, that kind of stuff. And it's not that hard to get them all in, and if it is hard for you, you can take it down a notch and take care of yourself. So I guess it's just listening to yourself, if that makes any sense. Your body.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's one of those things where, if you're not feeling great, just stay home. And don't kill yourself for staying, don't beat yourself up for staying home.
Yeah.
You did mention you're being easier on yourself in the creative process. You're trying to.
Mm-hmm.
You did write Writing with Whiskey.
Oh, God. Okay, so I started...
Speaking of writing.
So I started at the club, Syracuse Funny Bone, and big anxiety of wanting to fit in.
And this is when you're 20?
Yeah.
21, 20.
I must have been 21 on this, because the booker really liked me and was helping me and having me host, and he was really nurturing me. Bert Borth, I think he used to do stand-up. Yeah, he used to do stand-up, but then he got into more of the managing and the club stuff. And he would have a glass of whiskey at the bar and talk to me about comedy, and it was Woodford Reserve.
Yeah.
And he would pour me a glass, and I'd just sip it and talk to him about stuff. And I'm like, oh, this is fun. Like, this is comedy.
Yeah.
And then I bought a bottle and was like, I'll have a sip of it while I write.
Yeah, this is all working together.
Yeah. And then I woke up in my bed being like, I feel like crap.
Yeah.
And I get in the hall to go to the bathroom, and my mom is there, and my mom goes, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, yeah, why? And she's like, do you remember anything? And I'm like, no. And she's like, well, you couldn't stop vomiting, and we went to take you to urgent care because you just couldn't stop, and it was closed. So we brought you back, tried to nurse you or whatever, and then you're alive. So
So what happened? You just kept drinking while you were writing?
I was writing and I was sipping it, and I must have lost track.
You weren't paying attention.
I wasn't trying to get drunk or anything. I just thought, oh, this is what a writer does.
Yeah.
And then
you ended up giving yourself almost alcohol poisoning.
Yeah, I think I did. Or, very close.
Yeah, well, I've had it 3 times, and one of the symptoms is the uncontrollable vomiting.
Yeah.
Like, you just can't stop.
Yeah.
Like, the second you drink water, you throw it back up. It's because your body's trying to reject everything in the system.
And
you gave yourself alcohol poisoning.
Just trying to be a better comedian. I wasn't sad. I wasn't partying. I was truly just trying to be funny. And blacked out in the most embarrassing way.
Yeah, the most unsuspecting, not crazy cool kind of way.
Horrible.
Oh, man.
It's so embarrassing. So embarrassing. It's
Well, shouts out to mom and dad.
Mom and dad are the best. Yeah.
So speaking of embarrassing, I'm assuming this is embarrassing because it has work in the title, but you put work party on here. I wanted to talk about that.
So
Was this at the grocery store?
Yeah. I worked at the grocery store, and I got invited to this work party. Like it wasn't a work party, but it was everybody from work.
Yeah, and this is when you were younger?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe 19, 20.
Okay.
So this is my first time drinking, really.
Okay, so this is the first time you actually went out and...
This is my first time that well, maybe there was an incident before, a couple, parties before that, but this was the first one that wasn't...
So you weren't a big partier in high school? You weren't a go-out rage kind of guy?
No.
Yeah, me neither.
I was a nerd, and I was a funny guy, but I wasn't a popular guy.
Yeah.
I was in the middle, which is where I wanted to be. I was safe from everything.
Just close enough.
Yeah. And so then I get invited to this work party, and they're mixing drinks, and I'm just whatever they hand me.
Yeah.
Because I don't know anything. I still don't, but I now know about this. So they handed me drinks. I'm just drinking with the work people. And then I wake up.
Oh, not again.
Yeah, this is one of the first blackouts. And this is why I don't really go as crazy anymore. But I woke up, and my friend whose house it was in bed and under the covers, and I'm over his body horizontally.
Yeah.
So I'm like a blanket over his legs at the foot of the bed. And he has penises drawn all over his face. And near my hands is a marker. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm waking up. I'm like, I drew penises all over this guy's face. And I'm like, all right, I got to get out of here. And I go down the stairs, and his mom is coming up the stairs as I'm going down. And I'm like, hello. And she goes, hi. And I'm like, oh God.
Were they there? Were they present for the party?
She was there, I think.
Right.
But,
just to make sure nobody died.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I find out that at one point during my blackout state, I was in the kitchen by myself, and his mom walked in, and she was like, hey, you okay? And I went, shut up, and ran out of the room and ran into their bathroom and took out their shower curtain.
Oh,
and just fell into the tub, covered in the shower curtain. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then somehow got into that bed sprawled out thing. And she would come to the grocery store. She shopped at the one that I worked at and would come by. I worked at the service desk and would come by and tease me because she knew I was mortified.
Yeah.
And she would just come and look at me and go, shut up. And it was funny, and it's still funny, but I was like, oh my God, I suck. I'm an idiot.
Do you still talk to that friend?
Yeah, once in a while. And But yeah, that was an embarrassing time.
God, that's so. You were never a big, because I wasn't. I was the same way. I wasn't like a big. I was unpopular. Like I was funny in the moment, like in class and stuff. But I didn't have like a ton of friends that I hung out with after school.
Yeah,
so I never really did the party thing.
I didn't either. I'm glad I didn't. I mean, even there. That story is a perfect example of, and the whiskey one too. I had an issue of doing it just to fit in.
Yeah,
and. Now I'll have now it's more of a I can say no to alcohol, and I don't drink a lot. And when I do, it's when I'm around people that I love, and I'm like, okay, let's
have a couple.
Let's have a couple, and I'm working. I'm pretty good at it now. Of this is the line.
Yeah.
And as I get older, I'm like, I don't mind even bringing it closer to me as far as like. One's enough.
Oh, yeah.
To have a good time, enjoy the company. I am not trying to feel anything the next day of this night.
Yeah, you're not trying to wake up like hurting.
I really don't want my night bleeding into my day.
Yeah, and that's something that I discovered as I got older. You know, I got sober the last time because I almost died.
Right.
And it was a whole thing, and, hospitals and doctors and ERs. And
Man.
But the one thing I miss it a lot of the time. I shouldn't say a lot. That sounds bad. But like I miss the lifestyle.
Of course.
I don't miss the sickness, and I don't miss the hangovers and stuff. But I do miss like sometimes I go to the stand and I have no desire to drink because I know what it does to me.
Yeah.
And the thing my sponsor always says is you can't. The people who say, oh, I can't drink because I know what's going to happen, those people will drink again. I don't drink because I have no fucking idea what's going to happen.
Oh, wow.
So that's why I don't anymore, and I don't have the desire to drink. But when I go to the stand or like the cellar and hang out and I see everyone's like having a great time and stuff, there's a part of me that's like envious because I'm like, man, I wish I could have like one or two drinks.
Sure.
And like, yeah, we're just having a good time.
Right.
Because there are a lot of comics who don't drink anymore who are completely sober like I am. But then there's also comics who love to party, still. And I'm sure, you're obviously much more embedded in the New York comedy community than I am. So I'm sure you've been in situations where you're all hanging out and everyone's like, well, let's get fucked up. Are you just like, I'm all right?
Well, what I'm learning is, like, don't get me wrong, I'll still have, like, my girlfriend is a hilarious comic, Caitlin Palufo.
Very funny. She's going to come on the show. We're going to get on
yes. Soon. Check her out, everybody. But her and I will have a bunch of drinks, and that's like whatever. We're not like let's go crazy tonight.
Yeah, because losing the next day, like you said, is the worst.
Her and I are workaholics. That means more to us than anything. But like I love to unwind with my girlfriend and have a drink. Yeah. I love to unwind with comedians on the road with some drinks and tell stories and everything. But I'm proud of the fact that I don't feel like it is the fuel to a hang.
Yeah.
Like those hangs you're talking about, I think there's a lot of those that are sober.
I've experienced those for sure.
Like I was at Greg Stone and Sam Evans are good friends of mine, and we were hanging at the cellar the other night, and it's just like tap water and what I mean, the cellar doesn't give tap water, but it's like for me, I think it's the energy of is cliche as it is of New York City comedy in New York City. Like it's just that's an energy of itself that gives me all of us enough of a buzz.
That's true. Now that because as we're talking about it, because I go to the stand or the cellar like 3 or 4 times a night, or excuse me, 3 or 4 times a week.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it does happen, but it's rare when I'm like, oh man, I wish I could have a couple drinks.
Yeah.
But the other 90% of the time, we're having a great hang and we're all just hanging out.
Yeah.
Because you're right, it is one of those things where the more we're sitting around talking shit about, people or bookers or clubs or just talking comedy, it becomes like, oh, this is fun.
Yeah, I also think it's not conducive to a hang when one person's drunk.
Yeah.
So I think that is where that can start is like, are we doing this or are we not?
Yeah, that's when I'm the only sober person, I think is when it like clicks
That's
in my
hard.
head where I'm like, oh, well, now it's not as much fun as it would be.
I understand that. I prefer to I'm 29, but
Yeah.
like as I'm getting older, I'm like
Getting up there, man.
I know, yeah. I'm like I think I like this. I prefer more sober hangs through my week than anything, and I'm trying to just save the drinking ones for it's like I was in Atlanta with a bunch. It worked like a couple weekends ago, and it just worked out that a bunch of my comedy friends were there
In
at the
Atlanta.
same time.
Yeah, they were doing that competition a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my buddy, I had some friends opening for other comics there. I was there opening for Regan. We all met at a bar and just had a couple drinks. It's like, well, this is fun.
Yeah.
We're all together. This is
In
not
a
going to
different
happen
city.
a lot.
This is
yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
So that kind of stuff let's do it.
Yeah.
But in New York, I'm rarely having drinks.
Yeah, and that's the one interesting thing about it because most comics, especially now, it's not like the 70s and 80s where people were just doing coke and
Yeah.
getting fucked up all the time. Like people take it real serious.
Yeah.
And especially obviously there's a correlation between the more successful you are, the more serious you take it.
Yeah.
Because like they'll maybe have like one or two drinks, and you can tell the comics who like get fucking wasted.
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh, you kind of ruined the whole show. Like,
right.
you got up there and acted like an asshole.
I can't. My anxiety can't. And
I won't. Yeah.
my hangovers are anxious ones.
Yeah.
They're social. So it's like the next day, it's like a press release of apologies to everyone I saw that night
Yeah.
if I got too drunk. And it's like I can't live like that.
Yeah.
And also, I write in the morning, so I lose a day of writing if I am hungover.
Yeah, because you're just not going to do
Right.
it.
So all my stuff's done in the morning,
Yeah.
and I lose all of it.
God, I didn't even think about that. We're coming to the end. Tell everybody again about the album, the podcast, the whole thing.
Oh, sure.
We're going to pivot.
Don't
drink, kids. All right,
yeah.
here we go.
Oh, yeah. Well, quick thing on the
No, keep going. Yeah.
a positive drinking thing, or positive on non-drinking. When I did Colbert, we went to a bar after, like you all go to this one bar after,
Yeah.
and everyone that came to the show was there. And I remember I had one beer.
Wait, which bar? So
There's
say
a
that
bar
again.
near
So-
the Ed Sullivan Theater.
Okay, so after Colbert, everybody goes?
At least back then, because
Yeah.
it used to be a showcase. I think
Okay.
it's back to single people doing
Yeah.
it. But it used to be a showcase, so all the comics would go over there.
Okay.
And the booker and the families and the friends of those.
Oh, wow, so it
of
was
those
like a whole
comics.
thing.
It was a big hang.
Yeah.
And I remember I had one beer and then I'm at the bar and I'm like, oh, I'm hammered.
Really?
Thinking I'm hammered. And it turns out I was just happy.
Yeah, just having a good time.
I was just having a good time because I just accomplished this huge dream. So it's like that adrenaline and that feeling is like, you think as a young comic, you have to be having drinks in order to feel like, wow, I'm doing comedy. It's like, no, you'll
Yeah.
be fine. You don't need it. You
Well,
know?
and it's true too. Like you
Yeah.
go up and have a great set. You're like,
That's
man,
enough.
that's it. That's
it's
all I need.
truly enough. And that's where a lot of those problems come is we were like, oh, we got to keep it going. And
Yeah.
that's where that.
Well, and that's so. I remember the first time we were talking about it earlier, but the first time I ever did an open mic, I was so nervous that I
Yeah.
just kept drinking and drinking.
Yeah, it's a
But
big
my
thing.
anxiety pushed through it.
Right.
My anxiety was like, no. You're going to stay nervous. Like, I don't care how much you drink,
wow,
you're
yeah.
going to be nervous.
Right.
And I got on stage, and then it was this weird, like, almost because I kept drinking because my anxiety wasn't going away. I was almost in this weird, like, comatose state where I was just like, hey, how you doing? And then I remember when I lived in Oklahoma City and I was still drinking, I would, like, run the light at open mics.
Oh, God.
And
yeah.
I'd do an Arnold impression for,
Yeah.
like, 12 minutes. It's a 5-minute mic, and I do Arnold for like 12 minutes.
Oh my
and I was a
God.
bigger dude, so no one would like pull me off the stage. They'd just be like, "What the fuck?"
Right.
And it got bad. And then coming to New York and stuff, it's weird. It's exactly what you're saying. It's like you have a couple good sets, and you're like, "Oh, like I don't. This is more fun than anything I've
It's
ever done."
The best feeling ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to make. I wanted to say that. Anyways, my album.
Yeah.
I
Did you? I want to. You did the title as a joke, right?
The title's a joke. The title is
Is it in a joke?
It isn't a joke.
Okay.
So it's called Steven Rogers Before He Was Super. The obvious joke is I have the same name as Captain America, so it works out that way.
Before he was super.
Before he was super. But the thing for me is...
also a little Marvel DC slight.
Yeah.
I don't know if you meant to do that, but...
Oh.
Superman is DC.
Yeah.
Steven Rogers is
Marvel.
Marvel.
Well, my big thing with the title was it's my first album, and they can say... oh, have you heard his first one? It's Before He Was Super. And I like that as well. So anyways.
I thought it was hilarious. When you told me the title, I was like, this is a great self-deprecating.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's Steven Rogers Before He Was Super. It will be on my YouTube channel, Steven Rogers Comedy.
Do you have, when you say on the YouTube channel, did you shoot it? Like
I shot it.
3-camera shot? So it's a special. It's not an album. It's a special.
Yeah, I have a hard time saying that word about it. But yes, it is a special.
You love it, though.
I
it's
do
a special.
Love it. It's a special.
Here we go. Steven Rogers special coming out.
Yeah, and album on Spotify, iTunes, all that good stuff. Just it will be all in my bios of every social media. It'll be on my website. You won't be able to miss it. Steven Rogers Comedy on Instagram, StevenRogersComedy.com. All that stuff.
Do the podcast one more time. Plug that.
Panic Attacking Podcast. It's so fun. Comes out every Monday. Andrew Chavone's hilarious. It's really fun. We have a good chemistry. It's about anxiety. If anybody here has anxiety,
everybody listening has
great. It's a great podcast.
That's my main demographic.
Yeah, perfect.
Dudes who are anxious and fucking trying to not drink. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. Thank you, Steven, for coming on, man. I really appreciate it, man. Brennan T. Comedy on all social media. Thank God I got that handle 12 years ago. BrennanTComedy.com. Check out dates. I'll be in Ohio next month.
All right.
Yeah, there we go.
Perfect.
Cool. We'll talk to y'all next week.